I'm Danielle Sturm. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at the New England Medical Innovation Center, otherwise known as NEMIC. And I'm very excited to bring you more of an interactive session to access Rhode Island MedTech today. And it is a workshop and interactive presentation around connected health. And I just, before we get started, want to stress how important it is for people in this industry to understand not only how to develop medical devices, but how to develop the medical technologies and the systems, the digital systems within those devices, as sensors and technology like this is almost always integrated into healthcare devices these days. And also what you'll be learning today as well how important it is to understand how they fit into the system and users and patients' lives. So I will love to turn it over to the experts from Ximedica who will speak to that today. And leading the session is Jung Zukowski, the Director of Digital Products, and he's joined by Tom Lutzow, who is the Director of Human-Centered Design, Joe Gordon, who's the Vice President of Innovation, and Noe Jung, who is a UX designer at Ximedica. So Jan, you should be able to share your screen and get us started.
Thanks, Danielle. Just give me a second so that I can share my screen. So as we go in, and I'm setting this up, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jung Zukowski. I'm a Director of Digital Solutions at Ximedica. A lot of stuff that my group does, especially in digital solutions, is engaging with patients, not patients, but potential clients and our existing clients to talk to them about real-world strategies and solutions of taking either existing products and incorporating them into a cloud solution or a digital ecosystem, and working with some very talented folks at Ximedica to bring those thoughts to fruition and the processes that we go through to do that. And I'll do a quick introduction for Noah and turn it over to him. Noah?
Thank you. So this is Noah. I'm a UX designer at Ximedica. I'm in a digital products team, so I work with Jan. What I do is I work with clients or internally to do like user journey mapping sessions, user story, and low fidelity, high fidelity wireframes, clickable, so interactive prototypes to making a style guide so that I can hand off to engineers to make the design to real life products. And really excited to join this workshop with you all. And I'm not sure whether Tom or Joe is in this meeting.
They are. They're both here. So we'll okay. Go to Tom next.
Yeah. So Tom Lutzow, Director of Human-Centered Design at Ximedica. Been with Ximedica for a number of years and lead the teams that oversee our industrial design, our information design, and our UI UX design support. And really working across variety of technologies and different types of systems. The designers engage throughout the entire process, not just at one point. So we really advocate for a design team to be sort of a holistic approach throughout the design process. So I'll turn it over to Joe and he can introduce himself.
Yeah, hello everybody. So Joe Gordon, Vice President of Innovation at Ximedica. Been with the company 18 years actually. Head up technology and innovation there. Have the pleasure of working with the digital groups, the industrial designers. We actually have a lot of other disciplines within the organization, and we also work on a wide variety of different projects. So my role is kind of to oversee the processes that we establish, make sure we have a consistent sense of brand, make sure we're really tapping into all the content expertise and historical experiences we have when we embark on new engagements with clients to develop the best solutions.
All right, excellent.
So to start off today, the world that we live in today is a connected ecosystem world. And really gone are the days of sort of traditional standalone products that you're only thinking about just one particular product. Nowadays, in our regular consumer lives, we have the expectations that products are speaking to each other and work together. As whenever a clinician sort of walks out of the hospital and walks into his car, his phone automatically is going to sync with his car and it's going to be able to speak together. When he's in the home, he's going to be able to speak, he or she will be able to, you know, talk to a Google Home or a voice automated device. And the world in which we live in, we now have expectations that this is just what is needed to be able to be a relevant product in the current space. And as we think about healthcare is way behind. They don't have these connected devices at the point of what we experience in our regular consumer lives. And we're starting to catch up. You know, one of the things we see with a lot of our current clients is that to be relevant nowadays in the healthcare space, you really have to start to consider what your product is going to look like in a connected way and in a connected world. And you have to start thinking about how your product is then going to interface with the other products in that ecosystem and how they're going to work together. And we see it across most of the technologies we're working on now. Really, to be able to be relevant, they have to have that connected aspect to them.
Great, and just to touch on some of those points that Tom just talked to, he really touched on the point that having these standalone devices that people have come used to and using, moving towards these ecosystems and how to build out these ecosystems and how to take projects to work in existing ecosystems as well. And thinking about the entire holistic approach, from maybe even tying in pre-op and op if you're talking about a surgeon, and start tying in their procedures and processes that they want to do, and how to get that into the surgical theater as well, and how to collect data in the surgical theater so that it can they can put towards their notes afterwards, and even that data that they're collecting can start informing the process on similar surgeries that can go forward, and they could use for training for doctors, or influencing patient care afterwards and how that's going to come out. So early on, we start talking about all of these things. So we're engaging with our clients early on and immersing ourselves in the process. Joe mentioned before, we work with some very talented and very smart individuals at Ximedica. So we have the human factors group that we can lean on that has experience and access to get into doctors' offices or even surgical theaters to start conceptualizing what these high-level requirements and the user needs are going to be. So we'll use human factors for that. Our design engineers in both industrial design and UX can then start meeting with our clients and seeing what the processes are right now, and really coming up with those initial concepts of what we can do, and using the clients and the doctors and patients to start influencing some of these high-level solutions that we're coming up with. And as we start narrowing it down, we really start coming to what we want to focus, that scope and that MVP of what we want to build. What is the most important thing right now for those patients and for the doctors, and how we can really influence that ecosystem and give them the most value. Some of the tools that we use on this, we're using story maps and user journeys. Where we're conceptualizing some wireframes from a low fidelity to a high fidelity. We're doing clickable prototypes and using user research to really influence these decisions that we're making that can really bring value to all of our customers and clients.
So Ximedica's roots actually came out of, the founders were actually industrial designers. Design has always been core to our processes there, and incorporating a human-centered innovation has been something that's always been in our roots. And we actually execute this process on all our projects, and the kind of progression into our digital ecosystems has been very complementary to this process. And it's really foundationed around three different angles, right? So each of our projects, we're making sure that we are considering the human needs. Who's the user? What's their use environment? As Jan was just describing, getting out into the field and really doing those interviews and immersing ourselves in the use environment to make sure that we're not overlooking anything. It also considers really going through the entire product life cycle and considering the entire journey. So from storage through disposal, thinking of all the different stakeholders there and making sure that their needs are represented and ultimately solved within the solutions that we generate. The next one is the business factors. At the end of the day, these are products that we're developing to actually satisfy or integrate into a business model. At Ximedica, we always have a client. We're a consultancy, so our products are all being developed for somebody else. And it's really important that we both understand and then align with those business factors of our clients. And we have a lot of tools and we ask a lot of good questions to really understand their value proposition, identify the opposing needs of a project, the classic good, fast, cheap. But we certainly take that to the next level and really kind of tease out what is really linked to their success. What is the minimum viable product that will actually have them be able to hit their value proposition, their business model. That includes us doing appropriate designs. That includes as we make some design decisions around the level of complexity or how aggressive we are in terms of the actual functionality in the minimum viable product, and making sure that we're right sizing that so that the development timeline, the development dollars can actually still align with the client's needs, and that when they do launch that product, they'll actually launch it in a successful manner and hopefully progress to be much more comprehensive and continue future generations to actually add on some of that functionality that we just couldn't do up front or have made a conscious decision it didn't make sense to do up front. And then kind of the last leg of the stool is the enabling technologies. So once again, assessing the user needs, assessing the business needs. Are these clients trying to differentiate themselves, or are they a fast follower? So is there minimum functionality there, or do we really need to enhance the actual functionality to differentiate? So this is really a matter of looking at what exists in industry, what's emerging technology, and then ultimately kind of compiling those into different systems and different solution sets, and then doing informed down selections, once again, with all of the facets that we just described in mind to make some of those recommendations. So it truly is a holistic approach.
So building off of what Joe was just speaking to there and really thinking about the human needs, I'll go through a couple of the ways as Ximedica as we think about sort of the user and the human needs and the complexity around that. So the first thing is you really need to be considering the people that are interfacing with your products and where they're going to be used. So there's foundational activities that we're going to want to do that include going out into the use environments and doing qualitative research and ethnographies to better understand what different people are doing. Often we'll look at, we'll either look at competitive products, so look at products that are similar to the product that you're developing, or there might be other examples of prototypes that we can bring out if we're at that point already. And we'll actually bring them into the environment to see how those products will sort of interact in those spaces to better understand what implications that means to them and to the user. You don't really have the days anymore where you have one or two users that you're designing for. There's usually a much larger complex web of users that you're thinking about. You're not just designing for the primary clinician or nurse. You need to start thinking about, okay, who are the lab techs that might be using this? Is this a product that's going to first actually be given to the patient in the clinical environment and then migrate home? So then you're thinking about additional caregivers in the home environment. Are you thinking about the purchasing people, the folks that are actually the decision makers who decide whether this product is actually going to be acquired for this hospital? Usually there's a committee of people that make that decision, and what are the factors that they're considering whenever they're actually going to decide whether this product comes into their institution or not? How does this product fit into generally the IT landscape and the infrastructure of the hospital? Are you collecting data on this product? And if you are, how are you collecting in a way that's on the servers of that hospital, and that data can be collected in a secure fashion that fits into their network? And you're going to find that different hospitals have different types of structures, and you're going to have to work with them to make sure you're complying to their needs and their standards, and also with the regulatory standards of that product. And you're going to focus on, when you're out in these environments and you're understanding these human needs, you're essentially going to be collecting user needs, and you're really going to be thinking about what are the behaviors of the users, what are the different human factors that you're seeing, what are the things that you're observing during use and is actually not being said. And these all become critical aspects that are going to help inform really what that end product becomes. And then also thinking about even some of the softer things that maybe folks overlook or take for granted, everything from lighting considerations to the sounds of the environment to different supporting products or distractions. And you could think about an environment like a NICU as a really good example for that. where the lighting, the sounds that are being used are all highly regulated because you want to make sure that it's considered for the infant. And you want to make sure that the products that are in that space support that environment and then can support each other. Even when you're thinking about screen ratios and screen sizes, or if you're going to have a data outset or a screen that's generating information and you want to plug that into another larger monitor on the screen, are you considering the ratio and the size of the information? And how does that work in that environment? And what are the needs and the constraints of that environment? So again, this is really about going out, getting into that context and that environment to better understand and building out a set of user needs that you'll be developing to.
Great points. Thanks, Tom. And
Yeah.
As we go through, so as we're considering the user needs and who is going to be using this and how they're going to be using this, we start getting into more of the business needs as well. So things that we're considering, what is our regulatory strategy going forward going to be, and what is the infrastructure strategy going to be, and of course our data strategy going forward as well. Considering that, going back to the example that Tom just used, going into NICUs or surgical theaters and determining how tools are used in screen resolutions, and as we start thinking about that infrastructure that we need to build, even consider talking to some of the folks that work there, the doctors and the nurses, to get their opinion as well. You'll find anecdotes like even though foot pedals are very common, you'll see them in surgical theaters, but adding another foot pedal might add to the complexity of the overall surgery. So those things, considering what are the overall effects of what they're doing today and what you want to introduce is going to affect tomorrow as well. And getting into that, as you start thinking about the regulatory strategies of how any new equipment is going to work and how things are going to be secure, and talking outside of, say, the NICU or a surgical theater to the cloud, and what are the regulations and things that might be standing in your way at that point as well, and how all these devices are going to start connecting to each other as well. Like we mentioned, it's an ecosystem, and we want to introduce something to an environment so that it is going to improve or make more efficient the overall process, and not put a burden on, say, a surgeon who's doing a specific surgery. So adding to that and thinking about the overall infrastructure of where it's going to be, is this in a clinic or a hospital, or even now in the COVID era, you'll see a lot of outpatient stuff or home health care going, and how is that going to work, and how are we going to build out that infrastructure so that the patient and the provider's experience would be the same or even better than it would be if that patient is going to the doctor's office to get treated. So taking into consideration telehealth, telemedicine, and how the devices and what information they're going to be taking in, and communicating back to the doctor to change that course of care or influence decisions. And then from that data strategy, you're thinking about the business intelligence and the cost and the ROI that's coming from that as well. So all of that building on top of each other, determining the right data that you want to collect, how long you're keeping this data for. You're following HIPAA compliancy and PHI so that you're not taking more information than needed to determine that level of care as well. And going into the cost. Are you doing analysis and building data models on top of it? And how often are you maturing your data models and keeping the upkeep on that? And even following back to the regulatory, making sure that you're following the guidelines so that you're not doing everything in production, so that it might start influencing and affecting things that you already knew that worked because you validated them. So just following some great rules that are already in place from the FDA.
Yeah, jumping into the next section here, so the enabling technology. And technology is just that. It really is an enabler to everything we've been talking about so far. A lot of the ecosystem that Jan was just referring to, the digital aspects tend to be a little bit more fluid, and that's really an advantage. The opportunity to scale and to add functionality can be done I don't want to say reactionary, it's still part of the overall plan, but compared to the actual device development and generations of the device, I'd say you need to be a little bit more calculating when you think of those configurations and map out the generational plans and milestones or releases of the product that you want to do. The key there is to actually do that planning up front and start to identify what it is, once again, that minimum viable product, and what do you ultimately want this platform to progress to in the future. A lot of the opportunity really links here to the data itself. So giving that conscious forethought to identify what sensors should be in there, what data needs to be collected, so that maybe future generations, when you actually do want to get into more of that algorithm development and actually start to do some more of the predicted care and really hit the advanced analytics to kind of advance the progression of the product. The key there is to make sure that you are identifying the right methods to actually collect that data up front. There's plenty of examples where there's products that have sensors in them that are actually in the initial launch, but they're not really active. They're just collecting that data over time. They're maybe tracking efficacy. There could be accelerometers that are looking at the mobility of a patient, or certainly within the drug delivery aspect, there's a lot of either comorbidities that you want to track or vitals that are linked to the actual drug itself. Perhaps even differentiating between side effects and regular normal condition from a human or a user. Those are all key attributes that, once again, if you start to collect those up front early on in the actual platform, then you're able to kind of do the advanced analytics and actually develop those algorithms and leverage that data. Whereas if you wait and you say, okay, now I want to actually do some of this work to do more of diagnostics as opposed to just monitoring care. Now all of a sudden you have to implement that technology, and then you have to collect that data. And now once again, you're doing that more in a serial manner, and that's not the most efficient way to do it. So there really is a lot of forethought that needs to go into actually calculating how you want your device and the corresponding technology you incorporate into that to ultimately serve the digital ecosystem of the future. So there's a lot of different examples you can see in the considerations in the bottom. The one example I gave is there's a lot of surgical devices out there, equipment that require a lot of cognitive load of the actual physician. They're actually monitoring the signals and then interpreting and what the signal is, and then making a diagnostic decision based on that result. So it really relies on the core expertise of that user. And that's kind of been the standard of care in healthcare for as long as certainly I can remember. But the digital platform is now offering an opportunity to really advance that and even start to compile data, look at a lot of different user populations, look at data over time, and then incorporate that into some of the artificial intelligence that this decision and this informed care can be far superior to any single physician. Because there's no way that single physician could have access to all that data and knowledge. So that really is tapping into the potential. That's where you get the customized care, the specialized medicine that can be and is our current, but certainly the expectation is that's going to become the norm moving forward. Wearable devices, certainly many devices out there actually are performing treatments as a result of it. This is an easy way of actually getting some of the actual sensor and some of that data that was referred to as part of that. In the enabling technology, certainly how that wireless or how the data transmission occurs. So you can see the Echo that's up there or Alexa devices, and start to do the different user interface that facilitates that. But there's also your cell phone, there's LTE devices. So part of the developing for this ecosystem is, and one of the things that we need to solve for in each one of these is just ultimately how that data transmission is facilitated. And this is a critical aspect for ultimately these products being successful. We really need to think holistically, tap into the knowledge base of the entire user population, be sensitive to how tech savvy the users are to ultimately make sure that the product can still be successful. And we really work to reduce some of those friction points or to make sure that the devices are actually used appropriately. So jumping back to this section, I think the key here and a little bit of the topic for the day or the rest of the session, we do have a product example in the back there. So this is actually an asthma inhaler. We've talked about several different types of projects. I would say one of the projects types that really have benefited from this digital ecosystem is pharmaceuticals and drug delivery systems. So some of the things we mentioned in terms of driving adherence. That is certainly, if you know healthcare and you know drug delivery, you know that adherence is usually extremely low. Even in critical medications where they're life-sustaining, life-saving applications, if you actually do track the adherence of those, there really are shockingly low percentages of people that actually take their drug on time and correctly. So this really represents a significant opportunity to actually incorporate these new releases of drugs into an ecosystem that can help to actually foster that adherence and really drive that user to take the drug regimen in the intended way. But it doesn't stop there as well. There's certainly different opportunities, that other enhancements kind of tapping into the lifestyle, not only encouraging taking the drug correctly, but really that expanded care. And if the person is supposed to be ambulatory or supposed to be exercising a certain month, and you can really get an entire care regimen that can be facilitated and encouraged by that digital ecosystem. So the example we have here is a product that we had done. It actually attaches to an asthma inhaler. So a standard product, somewhat commoditized, a lot of generics exist out there, but it's still a big part of people's lives, and especially adolescents, and the ability for caregivers to actually track that as well. So the idea here is that this product can actually attach to the asthma inhalers that are on the market. And then with the corresponding app, it can both drive adherence and then track usage. And that app can actually progress over time and actually start to do some of the predictive care. It can be tapped into the weather and the pollen count, and kind of can advise the patient that, hey, this is one that you definitely should make sure you have your inhaler today, or maybe you should anticipate needing to dose yourself before you feel your symptoms, based on the fact that the pollen count is going to be greater today and we're expecting you to have some exacerbations or some potential attacks that are there. So it's a really complementary market to really tap into some of these. And so this is one example we had here that maybe was a commoditized product that you wouldn't think would benefit from that technology, but there's a clear depiction and an example of a product that really kind of does kind of show the benefits of that. So I'm going to put this one to my colleagues in a second if they want to add anything to this example, but then I also did want to kind of put you guys on notice that for the rest of the time, we really wanted to kind of understand if there's any products that you're working on, or if some of this talk so far has identified some of the potential that maybe you hadn't thought of. And what we want to do is go a little bit more improv on it. So in the whose line is it anywhere model, we welcome you to kind of think of a product that you're either working on and then serve that up to us. And then we can kind of talk and make this interactive and give some ideas of both some of the business aspects and how you can potentially tap into really the revenue that can come out of some of the data or some of the other business aspects that we've touched upon. Certainly the enabling technology that we were just discussing. As you describe your product platform, are the things that you could be considering from a technology standpoint that could advance that product. And then once again, making sure that if we talk through it, understanding all the stakeholders in your product, and we can certainly serve some questions back to you, but make some suggestions as to how you could advance your product based on this strategy or this approach. So Jan or Tom, you want to add anything to this one?
No, I think that was a great summary, Joe, in terms of the technology itself. And I think we're excited about sort of opening it up to the greater audience. And I think it's something that, you know, anybody that currently has something that they're maybe is new or they're working on that's sort of just started, we'd love to sort of give this an opportunity to trial it through this lens. So if people want to send over in a chat what they're interested in, we can then take a look at that and sort of provide feedback.
Yeah, and I'm monitoring the chats right now. Got some cool ideas floating back and forth, having a great conversation about blockchain and.
I guess I could talk on it if you guys would like.
Sure.
Please. All right. Hi. So my name is Anthony Dutra. I'm actually shared my project in the group chat. It's called Block MMP. Basically, last year there was a Cobra hackathon where we were just presented with a whole bunch of challenges. And one of them that came up was how do we share administration dosage data for Schedule II drugs across clinics in Rhode Island? Because today there was really no sort of centralized database or part of the PDMP where this information can be found. So basically what we did was we worked with Victor Clinics as well as Seth Clark, and we developed a permission blockchain to basically track patient administration data for the Victor Clinic and for doctors to check in case a patient ends up at a hospital and they can't know their drug administration data. So pretty much, I guess if we're gonna follow this sort of connected ecosystem, we try to cover pretty much everybody from the caregivers to the doctors to the patients. There isn't any wearables or anything like that. It's just a simple web page, but kind of where we're looking to do is sort of expand the project further into the many different avenues of, okay, what data isn't shared between particular hospitals or clinics in Rhode Island, and then how do we kind of decentralize it to ensure that security and privacy of patient information.
First off, I think the approach is so novel, and you're right. There is no centralized method, if we use Rhode Island specifically, to share that information amongst the different hospitals. From personal experience, even being in the lifespan ecosystem, sometimes it's even tough where my personal doc, my PCP is part of lifespan, and I'd go to say one of the hospitals in downtown for a treatment, and because they're on different EMRs, there's not a lot of information connecting back and forth, or even having those methods to get that information back and forth. So coming up with a novel approach like blockchain. So we were kind of talking a little bit on the chat itself, and there are a ton of possibilities that you can use with this, from getting health records up there and decentralized, so that no matter where you go, they're at the tip of your fingers, and you can share it with different people. And to supply chain and pharmaceuticals, from tracking it from making all the way to distribution centers, and then how it gets to the patients afterwards, and then how you get that medication, what your dosages are, and what your prescriptions look like, and where are those prescriptions coming from, and how they're exchanged with pharmacies afterwards. So there's huge potential within that market going forward. So I think I almost want to answer your question with a question, and it comes to adoption. And we kind of talked a little bit earlier about getting those user needs and biz factors and the infrastructure and technology set up. So you have this system, and getting it in front of providers to get them to adopt it and become part of their ecosystem. So what are some of the challenges that you're running into with that?
So one of the first things is just the fact that, okay, why would we put ourselves on this sort of network of information? What is the benefit overall? When we kind of talk about it, I mean, it always comes back down to, well, you're just saving lives, so why would you not want to be a part of this? But it is hard to try to build a business model around giving access to data. So on top of that too, it's then, who are we exactly giving or selling this to? Is it the hospitals and clinics themselves? Is it the healthcare providers, or is it more of an insurer, like a regulator market, where they're using this technology to maybe enhance insurance policies or something like that? So really trying to pinpoint where our true market is, outside of just the fact that we have a shared ledger of patient records.
Very cool. So if we talk about the regulatory, and this could be in general for any project you're working on, the FDA, as you start rolling this stuff out, they want to know, is the product safe, and how you're testing it to validate the safety of the device itself. Blockchain, there's not a lot of predicates out there that you can compare yourself to, and because it's always kind of growing, and how it's expanding. Have you gone through the FDA 510K or any other filing processes with a blockchain, and what are some of the things that you had to consider?
Yeah, no, we've never had to do anything like that. The only thing that we consider right now is, well, because the difference is what blockchain we're using, right? So permissioned versus a lot of the other ones that are non-permissioned, which have a whole bunch of other sort of connotations to them because of how the data is shared. So right now, I mean, aside from like a T2 core grant and trying to get into particular accelerators, we really don't know where to go from like even regulatory standpoint of confirming that kind of stuff. The only thing that we kind of did was just get a check mark for 42 CFR with like, you know, signing Google's HIPAA compliance where we get it hosted. So,
and you brought a good point. Maybe it's not necessarily an FDA thing, but maybe just a HIPAA compliance thing. So like going through high trust for getting your certification, that's an expensive process in itself. And how can you get funding for that and see investors and get them on board with that as you move forward so that you can get this in front of people? Yeah, ton of things to consider in there. I know we have a limited amount of time on that, but Anthony, I feel like I've seen your presentation before. Did you present back at NEMEC maybe in January, February with this?
I may have. I'm through T2 Core. The Cobra, is that associated with that?
Okay.
No. Well, I'd love to chat. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So someone else posted, Tara wrote to the group, remote monitoring and vitals, not always possible with just a wristwatch. Sometimes we need an additional personal electronic device, and introducing a new device always faces resistance from users. How do you, as a designer, come over human resistance to change? Great question.
I can speak to some of it, and then I guarantee Tom's going to have something to add on there too. But I think this is inherent in our approach, and there's obviously considering user burden and whether or not it justifies itself is a key part of that. So one of the things we do make sure is, as identified before, we identify the different stakeholders and then make sure that we do an appropriate task analysis, kind of thinking through each step in the process, and also consider lifestyle as part of that. So understanding that people are going to be active, sports, they're going to need to shower, and then make sure that whatever product we're actually designing is actually going to fit into that lifestyle. But then there's, on the complementary side of that, there's also the technical side of that. So if we're relying on this data to be generated and we need it to be in place 100% of the time, then that challenge becomes a greater one. And that may require a little bit more refinement and really kind of pushing the bounds of technology to either miniaturize it or look for different materials or adhesives that may extend the wear time, or may skin health is obviously a big one when you start to attach things to the body. So that may require a greater design refinement. But at the end of the day, your question is a very good one, and measuring ourselves against whether or not we've developed the right product is something that we hold very seriously, and that's certainly core to our process, whether it's thinking through the different failure modes that could be associated with the device, as well as any of the longevity and the testing and reliability testing that needs to go into that. So we do make sure that we actually establish those user needs, the corresponding requirements, and then do the right testing of that product to make sure that we've actually satisfied that.
Yeah, and Joe, just to add on to that too, I mean, you know, as we start to think about users and how they interact with these devices, I mean, for the same reason that whenever you log on to Uber, you as a user have 2 clicks that takes you to get into a car. Whenever as a user, as you think about what is the lowest barrier for adoption, and what as you're presenting a new technology into a space, what sort of burden are you putting on the user, and what is reasonable to expect? And it really goes back to what that technology is sort of collecting, and what is the relevance of that technology or that data output to that end user. Is that going to inform change in their behavior in a way that they are promoted to want that change? Is it something that's going to be motivating for them? And there's a lot, if you look at additional types of digital engagement, there's lots of ways that you can try to promote digital engagement whenever you have a more complex sort of need that you're asking of your user, whether that's things like gamification or other types of sort of engagement that you can bring in as well, that sort of pull in the user in a way to sort of try to trick them a little bit. But ultimately, the more you're able to embed a technology in a way that becomes almost absent to the user, we find is best. But there's always a balance there. It's a really good question, because we'll often find ourselves out in the field doing research with users where we're sort of presenting some of these concepts to them and sort of better understanding what their challenges are when they're presented with this new type of device or technology, and how that fits into their life. And it really comes back to, are you asking to change user behavior? And user behavior is very hard to change. If you're going to try to go down that pathway, you really need to be realistic with what is achievable and what's not. And otherwise, you're just going to have a technology that might have some amazing tech in it, but your user never really wants to use it. So I don't know, Jan, if you had anything else to add there. Or...
I don't. I was going to ask a further question of you guys. So
Yeah.
We're thinking even from clinical trials. The main purpose of this is adherence. We want the patients to stay on a regimen. And sometimes the adherence, that we might have to come up with some novel approaches. Is there environmental data that we might need to collect around them that can influence healthcare? Maybe something that Joe mentioned before. Can we record pollen count, or maybe mold in a house, or what the air quality is, that can determine the healthcare that is being delivered, along with medication that they're taking, and combining with wearables and sensors. This could go to behavioral, or it could be even building out to maybe a support system that notifications can be sent to caregivers to keep them on adherence. But are there any maybe novel approaches or creative solutions that you guys have come across in your time at Ximedica that to develop maybe some of this behavioral change or helping patients stick to adherence?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think there's some preconceptions out there, and I mean, it was a good question, Tara, but also picking you a little bit. Like the watch, a lot of people think of that, right? It's the iWatch. We can just do that. Everything's done there, but or that it has to be an app, I think is the other thing that's a misconception. I think, as Tom was describing, I mean, you really need to be motivated to do this. And if the less friction you have in the overall system, the more likely you are to be motivated, or at least to continue to adhere to the regimen. So really thinking through each one of the steps that needs to happen in the process, and then looking for the most creative way to both balance all of the different opposing needs of the project is a key part of that. So an example of a product that we actually did that we weren't convinced that the users would have that level of motivation to download the app and then to do that as part of a regiment, right? We didn't think that the actual return or value was there for the actual patient side of it. So in the interest of really kind of reducing the friction on them, we actually did go to more of a wearable model, and we made that wearable model extremely small. And lessened the tech on it, and really kind of, once again, as I described before, tried to do more of the development side in the interest of making sure that they would ultimately be a successful product. So rather than going to the traditional app interface, we went more to a wearable that actually corresponded to a module that was in the house. So the module, it just existed, and then the patient just wore the device, which was small and discreet. And then whenever the patient actually watched by the device, it was actually connected to LTE, and it actually communicated the data upstream. So it would actually bundle all the data streams and then deliver a larger packet. But it was very passive to the user. All the user needed to do was leave the thing on their body and then go about their lifestyle. So that's just one example of, it doesn't always have to be an app. It can be, or you can design the system to function at least a rudimentary level with the core components, and then add enhancements to that. And maybe you have more kind of traditional users or conservative users right up through more advanced users that really want to participate in all of the infrastructure that's established. So I think that's the key, is you should always approach this looking for different options, try to develop the right number of solutions that will satisfy the needs of all the stakeholders, and then ultimately make sure that you actually make the decision in an informed way that's defensible, that you feel like you've kind of checked the boxes.
Yeah. Well, just to add to that too, I think, Tara, as you think about this, often in this process, almost on every project that we do, we lay out an understanding of what does a use flat map look like for this potential journey that this user is going to go on. And we look at it through the lens of what is the actual product, what's the technology, and what is the user at that moment. And then thinking about at each one of those discrete moments, what is the barrier for use at that moment? And really thinking through what technology is going to be applied in a way that's going to help create the best user experience. For example, maybe if you had a technology that requires some sort of input or additional trigger from a user, maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe you want it to be more embedded and more invisible to the user. And to Joe's point, we often find that if there's not some sort of reward from the information that's being gathered at that moment from the device and being given to the user, then what's motivating the user to sort of to want to initiate that interaction. So you really need to look at all of the individual moments of the entire end-to-end use of that product and really start to think about and overlay the technology with the user and with that space to understand what the implications of that are. And then you can start to think about what technologies are appropriate and what are the embodiments that are appropriate to be able to engage that sort of ideal user experience across that process.
And I loved you touched upon that, the reward and the user experience. There's a couple comments in the board that came a little bit earlier from GJ and Brian Morley, and they're talking about some IP that Bay State has, that having an inhaler and your personal device kind of combining into a toy to encourage the inhaler to be used correctly, and touching upon the gamification and maybe some socialization going along with that. But that just goes back to the root of what we started with, knowing who your users are and how they're going to be used, and how it can trigger that adherence that they want to keep using the device to keep on their care regimen. Would you guys add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that made sense. And I did just put one in the chat too. It basically said challenge us, right? So I think one of the things we're expecting here is that people throw out things, well, they'll never be able to make a digitally or show the value of adding a digital ecosystem to something like this. So I guess, go ahead. Anybody in the audience have an idea of just a product that it may not be as obvious?
Hey Joe, I got a question. It's not a specific product, but maybe just what I've seen in what's going on in healthcare, where you have all these great ideas and great technologies that, you know, by themselves are making the movement happen, but then integrating them is what I've seen is a huge challenge. You know, my experience with J&J, right? We do a ton of M&A, and you take all these different puzzle pieces, and we know if we integrate them, it's going to have a massive impact. But the integration is such a challenging thing. How do you guys think about that? I understand about like expanding the capability of a technology and thinking through where this could go in the future and make sure you put those components into it. But what about integrating it into something else? And how do you think about that? And how do you see that maybe changing? Because it seems like it's really challenging to do the integrating piece right now.
Yeah, I figured Jan would jump on this one, but I can do it. But I want to make sure we answer it correctly too. So
I was going to ask the same
on what
thing.
the challenge is.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, it's seeing different digital technologies that are standalones, that if there's a way to integrate them, they become more powerful, right? So 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. I've seen that as just in my experience, where trying to integrate technologies is very time consuming, and sometimes it never actually happens. How do we make that easier? How do we speed up that process? Is that something that you guys are thinking about?
Right. So probably what you'll never see is standards with technologies that different locations use. So taking that out of the equation, this comes really early in our process. So just some examples. the way that we approach, we're even asking questions of how is this going to be used and where is it going to be used. I know of a number of products at J&J as well, from tools that can be used to really flesh out what an entire journey for a patient is going to be from pre-op to post-op, and having that, and then how do you get tools to integrate with that. And it's really developing having a robust backend system that can take a lot of solutions. At Ximedica, we've developed a cloud platform that is agnostic to the equipment and devices of how the things that are going to be connecting to it, and developing a suite of different methods that you can connect your devices to the cloud as well. Is it a user specific, so username and password, or are devices connecting directly to that and coming up with a good IoT management strategy? So just taking a step back and taking a look at the technology that you have, and to your point, looking at what's already out there, and things are always changing, and trying to be cognizant of, and I'm going to steal this from Joe, because we've had this conversation many times, thinking about what that multi-generational approach is going to be, and not necessarily where you are now, but where you want to be 1 year from now, 5 years from now, and really thinking of those things as you're developing for how they can fit into landscapes that might be changing down the road, whether it's as simple as something as an operating system changing, which you really don't have a lot of effect on, to brand new tools. So does that kind of answer that?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, I can try to add on to that too. I mean, we're device developers. That's what we do, right? So I mean, we're constantly seeing new projects, and generating concepts is certainly something that's part of most of the projects we embark on. As part of that process, we also do tech scouting. So it behooves us to look into industry and figure out what exists on the market, what may be OEM solutions that we can incorporate. So that's actually why I asked you to kind of articulate a little bit more of the challenge there, because we do that integration all the time. And while I don't want to trivialize it, and I can see how solutions may not be compatible, and that can be a point of frustration, and that may drive you more towards a custom solution as opposed to tapping into the efficiency of leveraging an existing solution. But that is certainly something we look to do to solve each of those problems along the way. And as Jan was just describing, we've actually set up kind of a structure, a foundation that's a very flexible platform to actually add things to. So that I think is part of the answer there. From a digital side, I think that becomes a little bit easier. I can make Jan's job sound really easy. But then from a hardware side, I mean, I think you do still have the opportunity to tap into some of the ecosystems and platforms that exist in there. Some have emerged over the years, and then they've disappeared. So I think there isn't necessarily, and somebody used the word standard, there isn't a standard around all the tech out there it's a Rector set and it's Legos and you can put them all together. So I would certainly agree with you in that regard. But I think always evaluating if there is an opportunity to be more efficient by tapping into existing is part of our process.
That's really helpful. Yeah, because from what I've seen, the companies that do it well, they're gonna be market leaders. They're gonna be the trendsetters. The ones that do it well and then the ones that don't are always just trying to figure it out, and then maybe never even get there, right? So I'm just trying to understand the why behind that.
Yeah. And I mean, the only thing I'd add on there, at the risk of emphasizing this point too much, is really that prioritization. So, I mean, as you start to see all these bells and whistles and features, and we could do that, it's distracting. You get kind of caught up in the shiny, and you want to do some of that. But I think really forcing yourself to make deliberate decisions and be gated in the appropriate manner. And it's really a staging system. So, I mean, as Jan referred to it, it's a multi-generational plan. I referenced it earlier because it is really important when it comes to these digital systems that you are calculating and you make tougher decisions to say, all right, this is what it's going to be for now. But you put the necessary hook points in place to make sure that you'll ultimately be successful down the road.
Yeah, and never discount the market research. You can get a ton of valuable information of that, reading articles, seeing where trends are going. And as you said, the successful ones are the ones that can really build these devices out that can have adoption everywhere. They're having those conversations with hospitals and clinics and home care on how to easily integrate into markets that and infrastructures that are already existing, as opposed to the niche ones that might only have like maybe a conversation with Lifespan and say, hey, I got this tool, how can it fit in yours? So just thinking a broad approach and seeing where the market is going and seeing where trends are, and technology that's already being adopted in those different places that you want to build for will really influence how you're going to build those your own solutions out.